This is great. Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and this is our dialogues on how to foster more empathy in the world. And I'm so pleased to be here with Ed Hooks today. Thanks for joining me, Ed.
Oh, I'm thrilled. It's such a pleasure to be here, Edwin.
Yeah, real pleasure. I'm really interested in the topic here of empathy and acting, and well, maybe I should give an introduction to you first. You know, from looking at your website, it says you've been a professional actor for over 30 years, and you're like a pioneer in training for animators. And you wrote a book called Acting for Animators, which I guess is pretty popular out there. And you teach this Acting for Animators masterclass, and you've talked, taught to companies internationally like DreamWorks, Sony, Microsoft, etc. And you've got a website, edhooks.com. So if anybody wants to go check in on what you're doing there, you've got all kinds of material. And so is it more by way of introduction that you'd like to share, just to give a background of you and your what you've been doing?
You did a superb job. That's who I am. I live in Los Angeles, and I head for the airport a lot, and I'm working on a new book now about the animation industry. And I've been working with animators since 1996. That was when I was first invited to teach them. Before that, I was all just a professional actor, and I was teaching professional level acting classes. But then I started working with animators, and it became the tail that wags my creative dog.
Well, I saw that you'd worked in over 100 films or movies or shows
TV.
Or whatever, TV.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my claim to fame is I was an extra in Apocalypse Now. I was a soldier running around in the Philippines.
That's quite a claim to fame, really.
Yeah. Well, I almost had a speaking part. My line was, he's holding his guts in with the wash basin, sir.
Really?
I didn't have the line. I almost had it. It was between me and somebody else, and I didn't get it. So,
well, that would have been the line for the century. That's a good line.
It is, yeah. So, well, anyway, the reason we're talking is because that you've written in your training. You talk a lot about empathy. You've written a couple articles about empathy. One is called Empathy Matters, and then there was another one I saw, Sympathy and Empathy versus Empathy. And I just saw that you'd recently at a conference you'd done a talk, or Are We There Yet? Making Empathy Matter, Acting for Animators. So that's kind of why we're here, is to kind of get your insights, or actually kind of dialogue about our shared insights about empathy. I've been starting to do these dialogues with more empathic listening, empathic reflective listening, and I asked if you wanted to do that, and you said, this is a little too, you thought I might inhibit some of your creativity in terms of speaking. So you don't have to do it, but I might periodically reflect what I'm hearing you say, just to kind of do at least a one-sided empathic listening. So just to warn you, if that's okay.
That's excellent. I need instruction in empathic listening, but I'll do my best to mirror it back to you. It's not natural to me. It's not a natural rhythm to repeat aloud what you say, to make sure there's an extra step in there, and I can see where it's a good step. It's just not one that's natural to me, and if I focus on that, it's like speaking about something and then making sure I jump rope 2-3 times before I speak again, and then jump rope. It's a back and forth in my head that I need. It's my problem.
So what I'm hearing there is like the empathic listening is not natural to you, that when you if you're having to reflect back, your brain is having to kind of stop and kind of go back to do the reflection, and you have a sense that it might kind of inhibit your your direct flow of your ideas. So what I did want to say is you don't have to do that. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm just saying I will periodically reflect back what I'm hearing, but you don't need to do it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Oh, good. So I'm just getting over a bit of a cold, so if I sound a little hoarse, that's why I might cough periodically as well.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for putting up for that. So where can we start? From your talk, I thought a really good starting point was you said we empathize all the time, but don't think of it. It's just room noise.
That's right. That's right. For me to understand empathy, I think is the same as understanding the purpose of it, the evolution purpose, the opposable thumb, the human laugh. Empathy is something that we evidently need to survive as humans. It must have a purpose. And so I start with that, is what's the purpose of it, and then how does it work? And my conclusion about this is that empathy is how we socially navigate with one another. And it's a way we stay tuned to the values. We only empathize with emotion. Emotion is can be defined as an automatic value response. And we empathize with these values. And this is how we know to be close to someone or how to stay away from someone. We know when someone is upset. It's empathy, and it goes all the time. It just goes all the time.
Let me just say reflect back what I'm hearing so far. So what I was hearing there is you're kind of saying that we have this empathy, and you're wanting to know why we have it. And what I was hearing there is that you're seeing that empathy is this way that we connect with each other, but kind of to navigate our social world. And that when we do that navigation, we empathize with people's feelings around us, and that helps us to navigate that social world.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of what you're saying? Uh-huh.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And also, a lot of us, we tend to not try to empathize with people whose values we don't share, which is a problem in the world, I think, that if we're to have people get along, we've got to have empathy. We've got to empathize. And, in the United States, we have a zero-sum kind of approach to things, my way or the highway. You're either for us or against us. We're good and they're the evildoers. This, to me, is not helpful at all. It's a zero-sum approach to the world, and what we need is non-zero-sum. And non-zero-sum can only happen if we empathize. Mm-hmm. And,
Yeah, so what I'm hearing there is that you're seeing that there's maybe blocks to empathy, and one of the blocks to empathy, you're saying, like in our society, one block is this worldview that you're either for us or against us, and that we live in this zero-sum world where, you either win or you lose, I guess, maybe it's, or you're for us or against us, and that we're needing to overcome that block, basically, to empathy.
Exactly, Edwin. And in my work, I tell my students, the politicians can tell us how we're all different, how this country is better than that one, how these people are better and smarter than the other ones. The politicians will do that. But I believe that it is the artist whose responsibility it is to tell us how we're the same.
Mm.
And that's what I teach, is that we're all the same. All humans, we're joined together. The first thing that a baby does when a baby is born is the baby tries to live. The last thing a person does before they die is they try to live. That we are joined together in that we all act to survive. Every human in the world. We're the same. We all have the same basic set of core emotions. The difference between us is that we have unique values. What makes you angry may make me sad. What makes me laugh may make you afraid. We have different values, and our values are expressed as emotion. And the emotion in acting, we learn that thinking tends to lead to conclusions, and emotion tends to lead to action.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I'm hearing there is that that maybe politicians or some of society tries to divide people, and that you're really seeing kind of, you didn't use this word, but really that we have a common humanity, that we're all the same, you know, that a baby wants to live, someone who's maybe, you know, at dying, they still want to live. So you're really wanting to see these deeper underlying common humanity, and that this humanity is this shared quality that we have is these emotions, but there's like different manifestations of it, different manifestations of these emotions happen, that is where the differences are, but underneath is a common humanity.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. We all have the same emotions. We have the same basic core emotions. There's a new movie out right now that Pixar has done called Inside Out, and where they have an 11-year-old girl and the emotions that are inside her head. They left 2 of the emotions out. Most psychologists will recognize that there's 7, and they've got 5 in there. They left off contempt and surprise because they thought 7 was too many to keep track of in the movie. But they've got the basic idea of how emotional development works. Please let me share with you something that an image. Mm-hmm. I made this up, okay? It doesn't come out of a book, but let me explain how this is an image for understanding empathy from my perspective. Mm-hmm. If you imagine a baby, and you, well, let's put it this way. Human babies are born half-baked. They're not ready to get born. Well, they're not unlike other animals. Human babies, because of our big brain, if we waited until the brain was developed fully, the baby would not fit through the birth canal. So our babies are born half-baked. And when they're born, they have the capacity to express all 7 emotions and the combinations that will later result in thousands of feelings, complex feelings. But these basic 7 emotions, but they don't have any values because they just got born. And that's the reason why babies tend to express only 2 emotions. You know, they're happy when you hold them and feed them, and they're angry when they're wet. And that's pretty much it. So this is the image. If you open up the top of the baby's head and imagine that there's 7 bookshelves in there, and at the top of each bookshelf there's the name of an emotion, 7 of them. Okay, starting right away when the baby's born, they begin to tell stories to themselves about what they see, what they experience, and everything they do, every time they do that, it's a book and it goes on the shelf. And this is how the values in emotions build from infancy on into childhood. Now, in the very middle of the baby's head, sticking up is like the image here is a periscope, like a submarine periscope that can go 360. That periscope is empathy, and it goes all the time. It's continually going. Yours is going right now, mine is going right now. And that periscope is looking for emotions from other humans. And so as the baby changes, this is how people develop. They get the wrong books on the wrong shelves. And one day they're afraid of spiders and they won't go out of the house. The book is on the wrong shelf. If you go to a psychiatrist because you're afraid of spiders, the psychiatrist can't do anything about your emotion. Your emotions are automatic, but what happens is somewhere back there you've got the wrong book in the wrong shelf having to do with those spiders. So when you see a spider, you're terrified. So it's an inappropriate emotional response. So that's how this is. And so we have this periscope, and we're continually monitoring emotions all day long with all around us. And this is how we get through the world. We need this in order to survive as humans. Without empathy, we become dinosaurs. It's that essential. And so this is my idea of why, when I say that empathy, we're just born with it, I think it is it's essential to human survival. As you know, not everybody is capable of empathy. Psychopaths, they say, have dysfunction in the mirror neurons. Autistic children, they have a problem in their brain, and they look at your face and they don't know what they see. So, but most people can empathize, and it's essential that for getting the next generation into being. Humans have to live in groups, and it's not easy for us to live in groups because we all have different values. But we can't live alone in the desert. It's hard to have babies that way. So if we're going to survive and get the next generation into being, empathy is essential.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I've been looking at, I see that model you have, that picture of the bookshelves and the periscope and so forth as a way of kind of illustrating that. What I've been thinking of recently about empathy is kind of, I don't know if it's abstracting it, but seeing that the brains are like these neural networks, right? If we just abstract ourselves, I got this neural network and you have this neural network over there in Los Angeles, and that the empathy is actually the way that the neural networks integrate with each other. So empathy is like this integrative process that we're constantly kind of reading the emotions, the intentions, and the way of being of others, and we're integrating it into our own, and it's a back and forth. It's a mutual integration that, we're both kind of getting closer to each other with maybe the ultimate getting close might be that making babies, right? That's, two people who are in love just have this huge, deep integration with each other. and it's a group, how a group kind of integrates with each other.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just that integrative quality of it is something I've been thinking of, and kind of abstracting it, that even there's like self empathy as well, like self integration, in the sense that, like with Inside Out, there's these different qualities within people that need to be integrated with each other, right? The anger or maybe the joy need to kind of talk to each other and kind of integrate with each other and kind of work things out.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is the neural networks, and that's the term you use, right? Neural networks.
Neural networks.
Yeah, that I hear it. I have in my head. I have trouble envisioning neural networks. I know what you're saying, and I understand that. I have difficulty envisioning what neural networks look like. It's a brain. I see a brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the brain. I'm hearing you're having trouble. You know, you're seeing a brain, but you're not knowing getting a picture of the neural networks. Like neural networks are individual neurons that wire together with each other. So every thought in the brain is an actual wired network. And then when when you see something, there's neurons that are firing and wiring with each other, and there's this constant wiring and rewiring of the brain. And the idea, I think, is that when I do an action like wave my hands, you have neurons in your head that are kind of mirroring that quality of waving of the hands. And so we're kind of like mirroring each other and kind of attuning to each other. Oh, sorry about that.
No, I wish I had a secret acting fix for that for you, but I don't. I think what I hear is that you're describing what I understand to be mirror neurons.
Mm-hmm.
That when, like right now, you just put that lozenge in your mouth or something.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I empathize with that. That makes you feel a little better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just me mirroring what I see in your face and in your demeanor. So if you had put that in your mouth and had made a mistake, and what you put in your mouth was a quarter,
mm-hmm.
I would see you react to that, and I would empathize with that.
Mm-hmm.
So that, to me, when you say the neural network, it's my understanding of how mirror neurons work. And but I think it's just semantics. I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, this was just a model I've been playing with recently, so I thought I would share that. There was what? Oh, son, yeah.
I'm sorry. One thing you did say, one thing, and that's that I would want to comment on or to discuss a little bit. You mentioned empathizing with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding of empathy is that it means feeling into. And empathy is only relevant to another person's feelings. To that, one of the essential requirements of empathy is distance, because you cannot empathize with yourself. You can be introspective. You can examine your emotions, which is healthy, something to do. But empathy requires a different human. You can't empathize with your own self. And that's my understanding of empathy.
Okay, what I'm hearing there is your understanding of empathy is that you need another person or another human to empathize with, and that there's kind kind of going into yourself would be more introspection versus an empathic approach.
Bravo, exactly.
Okay.
I feel very understood.
That's the point of the empathic listening, is to make the person feel like they've been heard and understood. So yeah, there's different, you know, there are people that talk about self-empathy. There's people like Carl Rogers, you know, who's a big therapist. He did a lot of work on empathy, and Marshall Rosenberg, who started nonviolent communication or compassionate communication. So they do talk about self-empathy in the sense of feeling into your own experience. And there are different processes. In the sense, there's processes that support that, like empathic listening, which I've been doing, is with you a little bit, you know, reflecting back what I'm hearing until you feel like you've been fully heard, allows you actually space to go deeper into your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that going deeper into the own experience is what's, and seeing your own feelings, maybe the underlying needs, and kind of bringing up more and more. And it's like a bottomless pit. You can always, there's no end to what's coming up. And so that's what they're calling self-empathy. And there's another process called focusing. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but it's by the therapist Gene Genlin, who was a student of Carl Rogers. And that process is that the person who's speaking speaks to their felt experience, like what's going on. Like, I feel a sense of spaciousness around me. I'm feeling a little kind of stress kind of in this part of me. I'm feeling a bit of fear in this sense, right in this part of my body, but I'm afraid I'm going to go into like a coughing, choking fit, you know, as opposed. So, and then the other person reflects back what they would be hearing me say as I express my felt experience. And that reflection actually creates a sense of space that allows the next level, going deeper into the person. So I've done this with focusing experts. And so for a whole hour, I just express the felt experience, and they just reflect back what they're hearing me say, which kind of creates this allowing me to go deeper and deeper into my own felt experience. And that, some people are just calling that self-empathy.
Yeah, yeah. I think I understand. Are you familiar with the Meisner technique in acting training?
No.
Yeah.
What is it?
There's there was a man named Sanford Meisner who was connected at one time with Lee Strasberg and method acting, and he was one of the ones that broke away and started his own take on method acting, if you will. And his book, Meisner on Acting, is the best-selling book of acting technique today in the United States. I don't know, maybe in the world. I don't teach the Meisner technique myself, but his technique is based on what he calls a repetition exercise. And his repetition exercise is precisely what you are describing as focus. Exactly the same thing, where you repeat and you're in sync, really, with the other person. What you're doing, what I hear that you're saying, is that you're just conceptually breaking all of this down in a kind of way. And but you would be very interested in that book. It's Meisner on Acting is the name. I can send you an email.
Oh, great. Yeah, because that's why I'm so excited about talking with you, because the whole field of acting, I think, is so rich in empathy. I mean, it's just such a core part of empathy, and I think we can learn so much by becoming better actors. You know, learning that role playing and that perspective taking, and learning, even like animators who are externalizing their internal dramas, you know, their internal dynamics. They're externalizing it into these characters and having these dialogues between maybe different parts of themselves.
You're right. You're absolutely right. There was a man named Antonin Artaud who actually had a learning disability and had trouble reading, but he was very famous in acting circles for the exercises that he did. But Antonin Artaud said that an actor is an athlete of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that describes it quite well. So when you say that acting and empathy, acting without empathy is an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense. Acting is all about empathy. An actor's job is to create in the audience a sense of empathy for the character that he's playing. And this isn't always easy. You know, a question arises, I mentioned it earlier, about empathizing with people that you don't share their values. For example, nobody likes to empathize with Adolf Hitler. I'm picking as extreme an example.
Right.
As there was a movie in 2004, maybe, called Downfall. I don't know. Did you ever see that movie?
I saw it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Arno Gruen? No, anyway, yeah, I saw that one. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because Bruno, what is his last name? Bruno Motz? I forget his
name. Oh,
last
yeah, mm-hmm. That's it.
But he's the first German actor to ever play Hitler in a movie. And that movie was very controversial because his performance invited the audience to empathize with Hitler. And there's many leaders in the Jewish community in particular who teach we don't empathize with Hitler. He was evil, he did evil things, and he's gone, and we don't want to empathize with him. They're very specific about it. We do not empathize with Hitler. My perspective on this is that unless we empathize with Hitler, then we learn nothing. Then we don't recognize the next Hitler that comes down the street. If you simply say this guy was bad, an evildoer, and now he's dead, he's gone, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. I think we have to worry about the potential Hitlers in the world very much. If I was cast to play Hitler, I would not be twirling my mustache and kicking babies down the stairs. Hitler had a dream. He believed that the world needed what he had to offer. He was wrong. I don't know what was going on in his head. I really don't. However, I do know that he did not get up every day and say, how much evil can I do? He had a dream. And that, Bruno Ganz, that's his name. But what Bruno Ganz did was, with having him go in and out of his private office, when he's in his private office, you could see his body relax, and you could see him know that he was lost, that his dream was not going to happen. And you could see this on the man's face. And then when he would walk into the hallway of the bunker, he would become the Hitler that we know and love, that with all of his inspiring his people and all of this. So that back and forth, going in and out of his office, was brilliant, a brilliant acting choice.
Well, what I'm hearing there is that there's people who say you shouldn't empathize with evil or bad people or so forth. And you're saying that it's really important to empathize with everyone. And otherwise, I mean, that's how we learn, and that's how we can head off this kind of, you know, painful, negative experience. If we don't empathize, we're not going to grow from that. And the manifestation that you act sounds like you really saw and learned a lot from that movie, The Downfall, and how Hitler was. That you kind of learned something from that.
Sure. If after 9/11, the President of the United States came out and said the people that crashed the planes into the World Trade Center don't like freedom, they don't like us, they're evildoers, and he declared a war against evil. That's what he did. Well, as a citizen, as somebody who's voting, I'm going to vote for anything that keeps people from crashing into the World Trade Center. It's not okay to crash planes into the World Trade Center. It's not okay. No, you cannot do that. However, as an actor, if I'm cast to play one of those hijackers, I'm not evil. I'm on a mission from God. I am doing God's work. And I'm not a bad guy.
There's a couple of responses I have to that. Is one is that empathizing with someone does not mean agreement. I mean, that's, I think, a really important distinction. That it's a way of gathering insight and understanding about what's going on. It does not mean agreement, and a lot of people, I think, fear that if they empathize with someone else, that they're agreeing with it and giving them support in a sense. So I think that's one part. The second part is that there was a book by Simon Baron Cohen, who's works at an autism research center at Cambridge University. He wrote a book, The Science of Evil, and the whole, which is back here and actually right back there. There it is on the bookshelf. Those are all empathy books back there. And so the book basically makes the point that even the word evil is not a good term to use, because it's kind of a circular word. You can't like really study it. It's like, why somebody evil? They were born evil. You know, it's just the way they are. And it kind of ends the conversation there. And he's actually saying, instead of using the word evil, to say empathy erosion or lack of empathy. So instead of saying Hitler was evil, we frame it in that he had very low empathy. Mm-hmm. And then, so the question is, how do we, you know, people who are flying planes into the World Trade Center have no empathy for the people that they're harming. So how do we address this lack of empathy? And do we address the lack of empathy with more lack of empathy, or do we address it with empathy? And I would come down on the way that we create a more empathic world is by fostering more empathy for everyone.
It is all semantics, I think. We are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I would say, from my perspective, because empathy is a constantly running thing, it's not something you can turn off, turn on. You can with your, I take that back. You can turn it off. You can get it in its way. You can refuse to empathize.
Yeah.
Intellectually, you can refuse. You can put a block up. And so, but removing that block, to me, is an intellectual process. It's not, and empathy is an automatic thing that's connected to emotions. What I said about acting earlier, that thinking tends to lead to conclusions, and that emotion tends to lead to action. And so you look at someone like a hijacker, someone who crashes someone who crashes the plane into the World Trade Center, and they're making conceptual choices, of course, but their values, their values are expressed in their emotions. Their emotions are pushing them to actually crash that plane. At some point here, this has got to just take over. It's not enough to, yes, we empathize. It's necessary to empathize. Once we empathize, you have to flip on your intellectual brain to understand the values that are behind what you're empathizing with. You understand? So it's a two-part process, and I really think that what you're saying and what I'm saying are exactly the same thing. It's just I don't think that you can build empathy. I think empathy is what it is. I think that you can short circuit with your brain. You can make.
Okay, so what I'm hearing there is you see that there's empathy in thinking, and that there are ways of short-circuiting empathy. I mean, you can kind of shut it down in different ways. So then there's different ways that you can open it up as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you're feeling that what we're saying here is basically the same thing. And I would agree. I was just basically building on what I thought I was hearing you say.
Yeah, it's the same thing. What I hear you say is that if we can enhance our ability to empathize more, then that's an ideal. I contend that enhancing your ability to empathize is not even possible. Empathy is there. What is possible is you can get out of empathy's way. You can stop short-circuiting it. You can desire, for example, more world peace, for example. And you can say, in order to get to world peace, I must understand why someone would do what they do. It's not my values, but I must understand it. And so what you're doing is giving yourself permission to empathize, but you're not actually saying, you're not actually like sandpapering your empathy ability to empathize. The empathy is there. You're just getting out of its way. That's my
Okay, I see. So you're saying that empathy is this natural phenomenon within us, and that all we need to do is kind of remove the barriers to that empathy, and the empathy itself, there's not a lot that we need to really do in terms of enhancing the empathy itself. It's more the removing of these barriers to empathy.
Exactly. If the President of the United States, we just got out of all these big, we're still in there in the Middle East with all of these wars, and for what? For what? It was, all of it was badly conceived in the first place, but you could tell that it started back at 9/11 when the President of the United States led us into a zero-sum situation. These people are bad, we're good. You know, they're evil, and we're not. And there's no understanding there. There's not an attempt to understand. When I travel a lot, I teach all around the world, and people ask me about America a lot. And I tell them, I say, you know what? If you want to really understand America, there's two movies to watch. High Noon with Gary Cooper and The Godfather. If you watch those two movies, you'll understand exactly what the United States is likely to do in any given situation. We need to have a villain, and the villain needs to have a black hat, and if there's not one convenient, we will create it in order to be able to do it. We are a zero-sum nation. And I feel, Edwin, I get emotional because I try to connect people, and it is all about empathy, and it distresses me when people shut down, when they say my way or the highway. I think that we have an obligation to connect with one another. We can't do it if we turn off empathy. We can't do it with zero-sum transactions.
So what I'm hearing there, Ed, is that you see that the United States has a sort of a zero-sum way of looking at the world, and that for you, and that's maybe disconnecting that worldview, and that you're valuing connection, and empathy is the way to have that connection, and it's even a very deep emotional feeling to you, having that sense of connection. I guess there's some sadness around that as well, just because of that lack of connection, maybe the pain that's generated through that lack of connection.
As I say, I teach everywhere in the world. I teach in China. Over there, you've got Confucius, you know. In India, we've got Hindu. I find that values vary from culture to culture, and it's difficult sometimes to understand. I can see if in China, for example, in China, I'm not considered a teacher. I'm considered a master. And I'm supposed to behave in certain Confucian ways. And so I have just offended people over there unwittingly, but because I am so Western in my way. For example, a teacher in China is not supposed to touch the students. I'm a touchy person. I touch. Sometimes I'll kiss you on the cheek. This is part of who I am. It's part of my way. And in China, this will horrify a student. They don't know what to do about it. And I've had to learn, don't do that if you're in China, because they don't react with pleasure. They react with alarm. And so empathy is my only way of adjusting my behavior to fit what goes on in another culture. I have to conceptually say, wait a minute, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. It's their culture. This is the values here. This is the way emotions are expressed by these people. It's up to me to understand, or to try to understand, and so that we can be connecting better.
Okay. So what I'm hearing there is that you're wanting to connect better with people all over the world, and that different cultures have, like in China, different ways of being and the different relationships with the teacher and student, and that you're using empathy to empathize with them, the students there, to see what their experience is, and to see how you can create a greater sense of connection with them through using empathy to connect with them, and by seeing what their experiences are and how to relate to them in a connecting way.
Exactly. I think that the work that you're doing is very important, and I think it's I admire this. For me, the biggest challenge in working on the subject of empathy is that it invites, it's so vague in some ways. People think they understand it, just innately understand it. And so you get, it's very easy to get semantically tangled up. And then you have a problem talking about it because you got people talking about the same thing in different ways. And you have to untangle it in order to go forward. You got to go back before you can go forward. And that's the biggest challenge that I think that you have in your work.
So what I'm hearing there is you're saying that the challenge, like you value it and the work on empathy, but you're saying the big challenge is just the difference in vocabulary and semantics, and that kind of the vagueness that can get created within that. And so that's just one of the challenges in terms of even talking about empathy. Do you mean
Yeah. I mean, I think that from what I've read, the word empathy didn't even come up until the mid-1920s, and it came out of German aesthetics. There's many people in the entertainment industry who still use the word sympathy when they mean empathy. If you look at the early books on acting, they'll use sympathy all the time because there wasn't a word for empathy. So, but there is this distinction. Empathy is feeling into, and sympathy is feeling for. You can
There's
feel.
another. Yeah, that's it's actually the feeling for someone, feeling sorry for someone actually blocks that feeling into. So it's actually an inhibitory sympathy. There's another quality that sometimes I've been noticing that gets confused with empathy, is that if I have an emotion, like I feel really sad, and that you're listening to me, and then you become sad. Instead of following me in my sadness, you become sad as kind of like a secondary kind of experience. Then people call that empathy. Whereas for me, it's like that's more of a sympathetic response. So, I mean, a lot of these things get very subtle, but there's a big difference. It's kind of like you see that a lot with someone who says, wow, my mother just died, I feel so sad. And then the person you're talking to says, well, my mother died a couple of years ago. Let me tell you about the sadness I felt. And then they go into their own sadness. And then the person who is initially, in distress, they feel like the attention has been taken away from them. So that's like kind of another kind of a sympathetic response that, I mean, it's a subtle thing, but you can really feel it. And I'm sure, I just wonder what comes up for you around that. Because I guess the reason I'm mentioning is I've just been talking with Paul Bloom, who wrote some articles against empathy. He's been going about that. But that's what he is calling empathy, and going on and say, it's not, you don't want to go to a therapist and you're feeling sad, and then your therapist gets sad, right? It's like, but that's not, and he's calling that empathy. And for me, that's not empathy. What's empathy is for the therapist to sit there and be with you in your sadness, but not like take it on, and that they're feeling into your experience of sadness. So
I agree with you. I think that if you're sad, I recognize your sadness because of empathy. Okay, I don't know why you're sad, and I may disagree with your values. It may be that what makes you sad doesn't make me sad. However, I feel sad when I do empathize with you being sad. That invites further exploration in my mind, which is, why is Edwin sad? And maybe I come to the conclusion that Edwin doesn't need to be sad. You know, the world is his oyster. I don't know. You know, Edwin needs some help. At which point, I'm no longer as sad here. I recognize what it is, and we use that empathy in order to take an action. So, but I do think that it does what you're saying is exactly right. I tell you what, there's an example that I use in my classes that might be relevant right now.
Mm-hmm.
I tell I'll have a class of 50 people there, and I'll say, okay, everybody in here has a friend, and your friend is having a hard time. His girlfriend has left him, and he's broke. He can't make his rent, and he's depressed. He's sad.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? You take him and you get him a beer and say, what's going on, man? You know, you'll get another girlfriend. I mean, maybe you loan him a few dollars or something to pay his rent. You do what a friend does. You do what a friend does. You try to help because you're empathizing. And then what happens is another month goes by and he's still like that. He's still moping around. So you say, come on, I'll get you another beer. So you get him another beer and you say, you know what? You really got to get it together because you're going to get fired. Tell you what, we'll go on a double date. I've got a girlfriend. She's got a friend. We'll go to the movie. We'll have a good time. Again, you do what a friend does. Now, imagine and be honest about your response. Another month goes by, and your friend is still like this. He's still moping around, still staring out the window. If at a certain point your friend does not begin to get it together, will you not begin to pull back emotionally the investment that you're making? The answer to this in my classes is inevitably, well, yeah. And I say to them, why? And the reason is because a person who will not get it together is not trying to survive. A person who will not get it together is pursuing death. And nature has hardwired us to respond favorably to survive. And so what happens is, with a person who will not get it together, is we shift from empathy to sympathy. We begin to feel sorry for this person. But we, in our heads, were saying, well, if it was me, I would get it together. And this person clearly doesn't, and I feel sorry for this person. So empathy shifts over to sympathy right there. So you can feel sympathy for somebody and still empathize with them or not. It isn't, they don't automatically come together. And both of them have to do with how you relate to what you would do or how you feel about the situation that you see them in. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, you're saying if you have a friend who's he's feeling really sad, feeling really depressed because of relationship or whatever that broke up, that you go and you empathize with him, you listen to him, and then kind of nothing happens. You go do it again, nothing happens. That at some point that feeling of empathy with them might shift into sympathy, or maybe I imagine it could be even other things like withdrawal. I mean, that's another way. It's like, I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want to sympathize with you. I don't want to empathize. I just don't want anything to do with you. Or I imagine it could go into anger. it could really go into a whole plethora of different emotions. You know, you could start, you know, berating the person, putting them down, criticizing them, like, you know, why aren't you doing better, you know, or something like that. So, so anyway, that's kind of what I was hearing.
That's exactly it. And I feel, do you know the term psychological visibility? You know that?
I haven't heard that term, no.
I actually got it from a psychiatrist some years ago, and I find it a very useful term because I think all of us desire to be seen for who we are and the values that we hold. And I think your empathetic listening in your empathetic conversation, what that does is that it puts on a kind of a pedestal psychological visibility.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it's very satisfying. I think that's the reason why it's such an appealing thing. I very much appreciate your feeding back to me what you perceive, and it does indeed make me feel psychologically visible.
Wow. Wow, I feel touched.
Because these concepts, some of these concepts are very complex.
Very, yeah.
Yeah, and you and I both spend probably more time than the average bear thinking about these things. And it's like, if, you know, knowledge and conversation is hierarchical in structure, in that I see that you understand something that I say, and then I can add more.
Right.
It's hierarchical. So I feel that one of the things when I'm teaching, and you're probably running into the same thing, is that you are able to comfortably talk about Danish design, and you need to make sure that the person you're talking to isn't still working on table and chair. You can't understand the concept of furniture unless you first understand table and chair. And you can't understand Danish design until you first understand furniture. And so when you spend a lot of time mulling around in a particular subject area, you find yourself at the Danish design point, and then you find, at least for me, I sometimes feel very isolated there, because I feel as though I understand some things from piecing these things together, and then I talk to someone and I see that they're working on table and chair, and I have to go back. I have to turn it backwards. I have to go backwards in the book to make sure I can communicate with them. And otherwise, they don't feel psychologically visible, and I don't feel psychologically visible. There's no communication. But I appreciate so much what you're doing, and the effort that you make to connect. It's most unusual in the world, I think. It's good.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing that you're valuing the approach towards connection that I'm doing, and that in terms of talking about empathy, that it can get very, you can get very into the nuances in a very nuanced level, and not everyone can follow or understand that. So you can't really share your insights with others because they'll get lost, and then there's a sense of maybe aloneness because of the lack of shared connection. And that's just something that you've been working with in terms of your teaching and so forth, is maybe your experience.
Exactly. And that's also where the image of the baby with the top of the head and the bookshelves, I'm always searching for simple images. Simple, simple, simple. I try to avoid talking about brain circuitry.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
uh, Even though I think I understand something about mirror neurons, uh, in my teaching, I talk about it very little because it requires some study, and so I look for these almost childlike images to help people understand emotion and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
So
where that came
mhm. Oh, okay, so you're really trying to simplify it as much as possible to make it accessible to like students. And if you get too deep and too maybe abstract or something or too much, it's too much for others to really understand it, from where they are. And so you really, so to create connection, you're trying to find simple, easy ways of conveying the information.
exactly. I have a friend that I see periodically every few weeks. We have dinner, have lunch. He's a professor at UCLA, a professor emeritus named Eran Zaidel. And he is one of the pioneers on left brain, right brain work. And he's writing a new book on humor. And he likes to talk to me because for him, humor has to do with the connections in the brain, the timing and whatnot. And of course, I don't think about that at all. So he's really interested in how I think about humor. I tell him, I say that drama is a factor of man's potential, and that comedy is a factor of man's limitations. And the ultimate limitation is that we're going to die. And so the human laugh says, I'm not dead yet, is what this is. This is, we have all of these pitfalls in life, things that don't work, and then we die anyway. And so humor is closely related to our sense of mortality, our fear of death.
Mm-hmm.
And Professor Zaidel is very fascinated with this whole idea. And he's trying to figure out how the fear of death and humor actually works in terms of the brain, and he's trying to justify these two things. And I don't know if he'll ever do it. We've been trying for some time, and frankly, I don't understand. He is way beyond Danish design and in terms of neurology, and I am really working on table. So we have really interesting conversations where I defer to him all the time because he's the one who understands brain. And but we have these conversations about empathy, about humor, about drama, emotion.
Well, I'm fine with having as many of these conversations as you would like. This is what I do all the time, and it's very, I mean, I see that you really value empathy and that sense of connection and are very much into exploring it and looking at and understanding it. So I'm open, I don't want to keep you longer. I mean, I could go on for the next hour, but in terms of your time schedule and so forth, I had a whole list of things to cover that I didn't even get to. So I'm just wondering how you are with time. I don't want to go over too much.
Well, I'm okay right now. If there's something that you'd like to touch on, sure.
Okay, so the one thing I did want to touch on is you had talked about empathy being about distance, and I think it was neutral is the word, empathy, right? And one thing, is that, you say empathy is a neutral thing. It doesn't lead to benevolence. I saw somewhere that you'd said that. But the point I wanted to make is I don't I think often empathy is seen as something neutral because people aren't necessarily all angry and all that. They're taking time to listen and be present. But what I want to say, my sense is that empathy itself is a highly, highly healing quality. So it's not neutral. It feels very good. Like you were saying that you felt heard by me because I was doing the empathic listening, which kind of helps with that feeling heard and kind of that presence. And that you could feel a visceral sense of, hey, this feels pretty good to be heard and understood. So I guess my point is that that empathy is inherently extremely positive, and perhaps one of the, and Carl Rogers says it feels damn good. and that's what it kind of boils down to. It's like, I do it because it feels damn good. So I just wondered how that kind of resonates with you, that issue of empathy not being neutral, in the sense that neutral is seen as kind of like detached, uninvolved, something, you know what I mean? It's like feeling less or something. I guess I'm really saying that empathy is something. It's not nothing. It is it's a real presence in and of itself.
Of course, and I agree with you. And for our listeners, I agree. I'm in 100% agreement. I would simply say that nature, this is an evolutionary adaptation, that it feels good because it is essential for our survival. So empathy itself will feel good,
Mm-hmm.
but when I said that it was neutral, I simply was looking at it as a function of us humans, that it doesn't necessarily lead to any particular action. And what we need are actions. If we're to get together, if we're to actually do something with the empathetic connection. So I think that empathy is not the end of itself. Empathy is just empathy. It means that I understand your feelings. It doesn't mean that we're going to get along any better. It doesn't mean that your daughter can marry my son. It doesn't mean anything, really. I see people all the time that clearly have emotion going on, and I empathize because I see that they're happy or they're sad or they're angry, and I don't have a clue why they feel like they do. I empathize, I recognize, I feel into what they feel, but it's simply neutral. In other words, it's a process. I feel this, but so what? It is human for me to feel this. I'm born with this capacity, and it doesn't mean that I'm going to take the effort to say, why are you angry? Why? Let me understand why you're angry, and maybe we can have something more to talk about. To me, that's two different steps. The empathy is simply a process that we humans have, and we need it, we're born with it, and we need it to survive. But what we don't have, what we're not born with, is the will to actually deal with one another in a constructive way. We are perfectly capable of shooting one another with guns and doing horrible things to one another, even if we, soldiers are taught not to empathize. In fact, if a soldier starts recognizing the enemy as somebody's husband, somebody's father, they take them off of the battlefield because they now are possibly not going to pull the trigger because they recognize another human. And I think what you're doing here is you're playing around with what the military does, is plays around with the empathetic response. They can't turn off empathy, but they can get in its way. They can put a barrier up, and that's what they do. And so much of anyway, what I am in agreement with you, and also with Carl Rogers on how empathy feels good.
Mm-hmm.
Releases endorphins. It does feel good because it's essential for human survival, and nature has built us that way. So does sex feel good. That's because we need that in order to survive.
Okay, so what I'm hearing there is you do see that empathy does feel good because we've been wired, by nature, that make empathy feels good because we need that for our social interaction, just like sex as well feels pretty good. But what I'm hearing there is that it's about taking the empathy into action, and that connection between empathy and action, that you're feeling that it not necessarily go into an active, into some form of action.
That's right. Exactly right.
I have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Okay, the first thing is that I would say that empathy itself is an action, in the sense that we could have our empathy like all shut down. So to take the action of actually taking the time to empathize with someone in and of itself is an action, would be the first thing. And the second point would be that what I got from Carl Rogers is he talks about how does change happen, because he sees empathy as a change agent. So what he's saying is that, and he would see people who are those depressed people, like the guy you're talking about lost his girlfriend, he's depressed, lethargic, has no energy, or they're burned out or whatever. And he would use pure empathic listening, like I was reflecting when I was hearing you say. That's all he did for an hour, every week or something, just empathically listen and let the person connect deeper and deeper with themselves. And what he says is that there's a point where people have like a new realization about themselves. Like they thought, oh, I'm a failure, I'm a terrible person, nobody loves me. And so that's like their self-image. And by hearing deeper and deeper into themselves, there'll come a point where they will see themselves differently. Their identity of who they are is different. Like, oh, I am really a caring person. Because they'll see something where they do care. And that new sense of a new identity, that when they go out into the world, they will start acting out of that new sense of being a caring person versus a depressed, unlovable person. So that's like a sense of action there for them. It's not like a direct action of, like Carl Rogers sees them being depressed and he does something for them, or he gives them a throat lozenge or something. But so that's like one kind of manifestation of an action. There's another one that I've seen within conflict resolution, that people are like pissed off with each other in conflict resolution. And the core of conflict resolution that I've seen is empathy. That the mediator, and I've done this, I do conflict resolution, is empathizing with both parties or multiple parties within the conflict. You go and you listen to them by themselves, just hear for an hour what's going on for them, for them to have time and space to be heard so they don't feel so alone or pissed off with their own feelings. And then you bring them all together to start using this empathic listening with each other. So they start listening and dialoguing with each other, and they slowly feel deeper and deeper into each other's experience. There's this big, it's like the military, that the empathy has been shut down. There's this big wall between everybody, and slowly that wall, like an onion, gets peeled away, deeper and deeper, till we come to a point where there's this sense of shared humanity, which you've mentioned as well. People say, oh, that's why you did what you do. I understand that. I would do the same thing in your situation. And, you know, this is really, friendship is important to you. Friendship is important to me. And then in a mediation, you come to that point and there's that sense of shared connection. And out of that shared connection, then the question becomes, what do we do next? And you'll see within a mediation, a dialogue starts, like an empathic, like, well, you know, we had all these misunderstandings. Let's get together once a week for coffee to keep building this sense of connection. Or, you know, we're pissed off with each other because my tree branch is hanging over your backyard. I'll tell you what, I'll hire somebody to cut that off. You know, maybe we'll share the cost 50-50. Does this work for you? And then there's this negotiation that kind of takes place, so that there's an action that comes out of that. So there's you know, there could be a little bit of empathy we have for each other, but we don't necessarily have deep enough empathy to take an action, except, you know, maybe I see someone at the post office and I'll hold open the door for them because I see that they need to, you know, they have their hands full. So there's little things like that. So, so there's really this sense of what I would actually call empathic creativity and empathic action that grows out of this deep connection with our common humanity and seeing what each other's needs and, you know, are.
What I'm hearing is that empathy is action, is what I'm hearing you say.
Can lead to action, yeah.
Yeah.
It is action in and of itself, yeah, right.
Yeah, and so
exactly.
Again, it's just semantics. It's from the way that, from an acting teacher's perspective, action is something that a human does, and you play an action in pursuit of an objective that is provable. And so, in conflict resolution, from an acting perspective, Mr. Brown takes an action when he agrees to enter into conflict resolution with Mr. Green. Both of them are taking actions. The empathy itself is not action. Mr. Brown and Mr. Green are both saying, we're going into conflict resolution. And the conflict resolution leader, I don't know what you...
Facilitator, yeah. Mediator, maybe.
Yeah. The mediator is also taking action, and his action is to understand both points of view, to reflect both points of view in an empathetic way, so that both sides can see and then come to a better agreement. So everybody's taking action, but the empathy itself is just a process, in my opinion. It's not something that is capable of action. Only a human is capable. I mean, an animal can take an action, but but action is something that we do, and empathy is simply a mechanism that with which we read one another's values and feelings. That's all.
So what I'm hearing there is you're saying that action is something that we do, whereas empathy is just like something that reads, kind of helps us read each other's actions and feelings.
Sure.
And you're seeing kind of like a distinction between those two, the empathy and the action.
With Mr. Brown and Mr. Green, and they got the tree in the yard that you just mentioned a moment ago. Okay. Mr. Brown doesn't understand why Mr. Green gets so angry when he says you need to cut off 2 or 3 of these branches that are brushing against my house. Because Mr. Green says trees are wonderful in the world and we need them, the oxygen. And Mr. Brown says, not in my yard, you don't. And so Mr. Brown sees that Mr. Green is angry at the very idea of cutting branches off of his tree. Mr. Brown disagrees with Mr. Green, and Mr. Brown is hopeful that the mediator will get Mr. Green to at least chop a bit of the branches off.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're doing here is we're negotiating actions. We're negotiating what the respective parties are going to do. We're not negotiating whether or not we're empathizing. Mr. Brown sees that Mr. Green is angry. He sees that. Empathy, he picks it up right away. You're an angry person. I can see that. You and I have different values when it comes to trees in other people's yards. And we're going to have to come to some kind of agreement because there are property rights in the world. And so we have this thing. But all of this, the actions have to do with people choosing and deciding to enter into this process and to agree to adhere to the results. Those are actions. But the empathy is part of this process, but it is not in itself an action. You're not going to get an action unless you have empathy in this particular situation. Or you could.
You're saying that there's the actions, and you can have these actions of going into the mediation and abiding by the outcome, but that the empathy itself is not an action. It's just like a state of being, or I don't know. I'm adding that. I don't know if that's
exactly. That's exactly right. In other words, I think that you and I, we walk around all day long with empathy going, and if we get into some kind of a disagreement, I see that you're sad or you're angry, and you see that I'm sad or I'm angry. It's our decision to act on that. I can choose whether or not to deal with you. I can choose whether or not to make the effort to communicate. And that's an action. The empathy itself is just, I see you're angry. I see you're sad. I recognize that. I feel into that. I don't know why you should be angry at this thing that I'm not angry about, but I recognize that you're angry. The process of recognizing it is an empathetic response, but it doesn't imply any particular action. Your actions have to do with what you choose to do.
Okay, so what I'm hearing there is that actions are actually choices that are made, whereas the empathy is like this state of being, but the actual, when an action happens through a decision or a choice being made.
Mm-hmm. Sure, absolutely. And I just think that, you know, this is, everybody's got their own context on this, and I think that's why this conversation we're having is so useful. Because the more that we talk, the more it's clear that we're on exactly the same page. It simply is a matter of which side of the camel you're looking at. It's the same camel. It's the fact that you are interested in talking with me and I am interested in talking with you, those are actions that you and I both took in order to arrive at this result. And why? Because that's how our respective values are. I think that I have something to learn from you. I feel as though there's something that I can get from you. And already I know that presumption was correct. I had a feeling that you and I were not far apart. Mm-hmm. That it was simply a matter of with some of the things that I thought we were disagreeing about, I didn't think we were really disagreeing. I thought it was a matter of semantics. And the more I talk to you, the more I think that is true. That we're the same. We're the same, and we're after the same thing.
So I'm hearing there is that it's kind of like looking at the camel. You're seeing different points of perspectives on the camel, but it's the same thing. And that the action that you and I took is we both took action to go into this dialogue with each other. And that behind that action, on your point, on your side, is your feeling that you felt you could gain something by having this dialogue. And so that was kind of like the background motivation. And that I'm also hearing that you feel that that was, and that you also felt that we weren't that far apart in our views and so forth too.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly so. And I think that conversations of this sort can only be good. There's no downside. This fosters more communication. If this interview goes on to YouTube, and if somebody watches it, and if this conversation motivates a person, one person, to try harder to communicate with the people around them, try harder to understand other people, then this has been one of the best hours that I will have spent. And I believe that that's why I do these things. And I think it's why you do it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I thought I would enjoy, talking with you too, because there's a real spaciousness of, it's like an emotional spaciousness that you have for looking at these issues, and there's a real, I don't know, like a depth, and that sense of connection really comes across, that you're really wanting to connect and you're really valuing that sense of connection. And you even got, emotional, a little bit tearful about when you felt into that sense of connection. And I think that we both have that. And I also feel that it's this dialogue. That's what empathy is this kind of this, well, that's one part, is to have these dialogues to kind of uncover, to get down to that sense of our common humanity, that dialogues can really, is one method, one way of getting to it. Just like, the theater is a huge method for creating that sense of connection. And that's actually the direction I'm going to. I feel I need to do more in that realm. I had mentioned to you, I want to do a reality TV show like Super Nanny, where we go into a family and actually bring in empathy building processes and skills, so you can actually see a dysfunctional family become more empathic and have more, connection and, more care and love. And I think, that, film, theater, acting, role playing is just huge in really conveying that. So much more than just talking heads.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the idea of your show, and I don't know how much you want to talk about it. I think it's a very good idea. I think it is a commercial idea, and I don't know exactly how you frame it in terms of selling it, but it's the idea of for the reality show like that is valid, and I think you get a lot of response if you can frame it right. Pitching it, you got to pitch it. You're in Hollywood, and you can't have. I suppose you've got one person who's the main featured empathy leader that will enter into like a super nanny, like you say. I wonder if there could be more than one. Saturday Night Live has a different leader, a different host every week. And I wonder if there wouldn't be something there to where you could get more than just one person.
It's an empathy team goes in. Instead of the lone hero like Super Nanny, we actually have the empathy team that goes in there and listens and offers support. Not to you know, to listen to this. I mean, I feel it's extremely rich. I mean, it's one of the most, you know, rich conversations I've had with, you know, with someone around this. So I'm really grateful for, you know, for you reaching out again and, you know, following up. And I would like to keep the conversation going because I really love it.
If I could reach through the television and give you a hug, I would.
Well, I'll give you a virtual hug.